Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, March 25th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. We'll talk some college football, both FBS and FCS on today's show. Then take a look at the Sweet 16, probably hit all 8 games here in rapid-fire fashion. Maybe talk a little bit about what we could see for the Elite 8. We'll see how much time we have at the tail end of today's show. Opening day is a week away. So if you have not picked up the 2021 MLB betting guide over at ATS.io or looked at the PDF that I've tweeted out multiple times here over the last few weeks, you will not be fully prepared for the Major League Baseball season, at least in my very biased opinion. So it's a very good time to do your baseball research, get all of that squared away before that season begins a week from today. I will be doing a daily picks article over at ATS.io for everybody to check out. And also, too, right here on ATS Radio, I'll be doing the Bettors Box twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays once this college basketball season is completely wrapped up. And once I wrap up with my guests for the end of what has been a pretty interesting and pretty exciting football and basketball time period. Also, over at ATS.io, got a preview of UFC 260 coming up this weekend. The golf tournament is going on. We've got thoughts on that. Picks and predictions from our talented cast of writers. YouTube videos on our ATS YouTube from Brian Blessing. Lots of stuff for you to check out all around the ATS platforms. And make sure you download that ATS app as well, which you can find in the Google Play Store or in the Apple Store. With that, we bring on today's guest. That is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And Brad, how's it going today, man?
Man, it's going well. How you doing?
I'm busy, man. I'm busy. I'm excited about the start of the baseball season, but you know how it is, man. This grind just never slows down. And with that in mind, you're taking some of your free time watching college football spring games already.
Yeah, probably some were surprised at that, but I, watched 2 over the weekend and, broke them down a little bit on Twitter, some observations and thoughts. And, do I get a lot out of spring games? No, but, I get the most important things, the storylines, whether they got new coordinators, new quarterbacks. And then, sometimes I do see a player or two that, maybe I wasn't aware of that I really liked what I saw. So I know it's, when you take out the commercials, it's 90 minutes. And I mean, it's, I guess, better than watching, 90 Day Fiance or something.
Oh, is that what you watch?
No. I just tried to think. I tried to think of something that is so like anti-me, whether it's like The Bachelor or something like that. I see it trending on Twitter, and a lot of guys that I follow and respect are tweeting about shows like that. I'm not doing that. I'm watching football.
If they asked, would you go on The Bachelor?
No, I wouldn't do that. Are you kidding me? I think I'd have to, it'd be a different show. I doubt they could find 20 girls that would be willing to do that show with me.
Ouch. All right. Well, I'll let you go ahead and ice down your self-inflicted burn there as we kind of move forward. But, I think it is important if that's, what you want to do, because one of the things that we've talked about before, and no offense to your former employer, Phil Steele, but, a lot of these places that do these preseason magazines and publications and all of that, they can't really be honest. They can't really be forthright or be critical, because it's really about, having the ability to reach out to these coaches. It's about having those lines of communication open. So you can't really criticize to the same degree that maybe you would, because you don't want that coach to freeze you out. You have to have that level of access. So getting a chance to actually watch this for yourself, kind of having that unbiased opinion, I think is something that you've relied on in the past, something I know that you've used to help with your own personal handicapping. And it's not a bad thing to get your eyes on something, to see if there are areas of need for these teams where, coaches may not be forthright, may not be honest with the people that are writing those preseason magazines, but you can take an honest assessment based on what you've seen.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. I just want to make money. I don't care about anything else, whether that coach I'm really friendly with texts me or whatnot. And actually I appreciate a lot of the coaches that are very candid and forthright. I mean, Lane Kiffin comes to mind, a guy that's not afraid, Mike Leach. That's why I appreciate the coaches that are candid, aren't, catering to, the media sort of say. But yeah, I do like watching with my own eyes. And obviously I also have time in the summer. I go back and watch games from a year ago and see what I missed. But as they say, tape don't lie. So that's why I do take the time to watch as many as I can.
Well, and something else I like too is that, you were kind of talking about some of the guys that impressed you. And again, make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. You were talking about some of the guys that impressed you, some of the things that were being done differently. But what I really liked looking at was, you talked about some of the line play, the offensive and defensive line play. And I think that's something that's really important. If you get a chance to watch that, and obviously look, I mean, these teams have 5 months to fix these things before they play actual games. But you start talking about what you're seeing, physically with the lines. Are they big? Are they strong? Is one side dominating the other side? Something like that. There's no substitute for being able to look at things like that on video or film.
Absolutely. And maybe it's just my background where I had, season tickets to end zone seats where I've been able to watch football from a different perspective, starting out young. But yeah, I think it's easier in a spring game where you're not following the ball. You don't have to follow the ball. Who cares? Sort of say that I can isolate on the line of scrimmage much more than I can on an individual game. And I'll say one more thing. What also helps is if you have a really good announcing crew for a spring game that have done their homework, done film study, maybe we're at a couple practices before the spring game, that is vital. I mean, I can tell so easily, people are just showing up and broadcasting the game compared to other people that are maybe like an insider sort of say, and can really break down the team. So that is always important to me. If I get, the actual play-by-play announcer or one of the analysts that, and it obviously also helps if they're very forthright and can be honest about the program, but the level of coverage really is disparate. And I'm not afraid to throw it out there. I mean, I had very disparate results already from the 2 games I watched. Pac-12 network is a shit show, but one thing they do about as well as anybody, they do these spring games well. And one guy in particular, Yogi Roth, who breaks down film, and he's very positive. He's not very critical, but man, he finds a lot of jewels, guys that you never heard of that he likes from, high school tape or practice tape. He breaks it down, and you can tell he eats, sleeps, and breathes Pac-12 football, where you don't say that much about anybody else. And then the Missouri spring game, you can just tell there's a couple broadcasters that, I'm not saying that they were there to get a paycheck, but they didn't have as much inside information and didn't go as in-depth on the individual players. So a lot of times you're at the mercy of the announcing crew as well.
Well, and of course, too, I mean, I know people are probably wondering why we're talking FBS college football with the Sweet 16 going on. But again, these win total markets probably open up within the next 3 weeks or so, I would say. Maybe
magazines will be out in May. I mean, we're at the end of March, so we're talking, 5-6 weeks. I mean, 5-6 weeks from now, the market, I mean, it's going to be, obviously you're a baseball guy and that's going to be critical, but after the NCAA tournament and you get a month of spring games, I mean, May is when it starts now. I mean, it's for guys like myself. I mean, it's officially kind of football season at that point.
Yeah, I mean, football, whether it's college football or the NFL, 365 days a year and 366 if it's a leap year. You got the NFL draft coming up, and then you're going to get win totals for that. Now that the free agent period is kind of wound down a little bit. Look, I mean, this is just the nature of the beast here in this business. So if you want to play win totals or something in the futures market, something like that, it is imperative at this time of the year, with whatever free time you may have that you're not using on college basketball or NBA or any of the other sports that's going on, if you want to be ready for these things, they are coming very, very quickly, to say the least. And before we move on to the FCS side of things, one way to be prepared, one shortcut that you so generously provide all of us in this space here, is that spring guide that you have over at bradpowersports.com. And like we talked about last week, it is exceptional.
Well, thank you. Hopefully that's an unbiased opinion there, like we were talking about. Not afraid to be critical, and if you want to, that's fine. But I do think it's a good jumping off start as far as if you want to start taking a peek. Now, I will say this, because, I mean, a lot of people on Twitter ask me about certain power ratings. That is a first draft of a power rating. I mean, come on. No, most of these teams haven't even gone through spring. Now, will I be adjusting a team 10 points off of that? No, unless, an All-American quarterback is hurt or a head coach leaves. So, I mean, I'm not going to be, adjusting them too much. But, a lot of times I'll adjust a team a point or two type of thing as we go through spring and the summer. But, yeah, if you want win totals, power ratings, strength of schedule, you just want all the team's schedule with a projected line on every single game. If you want all that in one spot, download the Spring Guide. It's free. BradPowerSports.com.
Well, we got spring football here, not just with the practice games, but with the FCS, as we've been talking about here a lot throughout these shows. And, the FCS marketplace is interesting, to say the least. There was a lot more excitement for it early on. You've got some books now that really aren't even worried about posting it. They're just more concerned with the Sweet 16 and everything else that's going on. But, anything, we kind of do a market update each and every week here on the show. Anything kind of stand out to you about things that are going on in the marketplace? Anything new that, is meriting attention?
This week in particular, there's a lot of COVID cancellations, which you would expect those to actually dwindle, but that's not the case. Underdogs has still been very profitable, 61% for the spring season so far. Scoring has been up. That's one thing where we're trending, where scoring was way down the first few weeks. We're starting to see a little bit more offensive efficiency from teams where the over, I think it was the first time all spring, actually, if you blindly bet the over on every game, you would have actually shown a slight profit. That's the first time that's happened. And I don't think it's all the market, finally, or maybe over adjusted the totals. I just think from a scoring aspect, you're finally starting to see some offenses click. Another thing that I would say, we're starting to get to that point where there's just 3-4 weeks left of the regular season before we get to the playoffs. And now you're starting to see teams where, they've either overachieved and they're really excited about playing in the spring and everything's well, or you have other teams that are banged up, beat up. And we finally had our first team opt out of the rest of the season in Illinois State. They're banged up. They have underachieved so far. And I think you're probably going to get more of that as we move along the next few weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel like motivation is going to start coming into question?
Yeah,
now,
I do.
Where, you got some of these teams, and also too, let's think about this, that these teams will be right back on the field in 5 months' time for actual games, and shorter than that, of course, for summer camps, two-a-days, all that kind of thing. So, you may have some teams where they're just kind of going, you know what, we got to play again soon. And, either that leads to a lack of motivation, or maybe some of these coaches may start looking at some of the younger players that are in the program, something like that. That could very much be a possibility going forward.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I do expect that to be the case. And if you're reading up and doing the homework, you can take advantage of it, hopefully.
Well, and there are some kids that are already committed to transferring to FBS programs, right?
Yeah, the one that I've been talking about, probably one of the biggest stories so far this spring, if you've been really in the weeds on it, VMI is having like their best season in 40 years. And a lot of it has to do with their quarterback, which incredibly, I can't believe Maryland is allowing this, but he's going to be at Maryland in the fall, but they allowed him to play at VMI to finish it out here in the spring. And that's a team that's very excited about, what's happening, what's going on. So yeah, some of these guys will end up transferring out to FBS programs. I can't say it enough. I'm sure coaches, I know if I was a coach and my team was getting a little bit banged up, I don't blame guys for opting out the rest of the season. You're playing 6 games or so, maybe even in some cases more. And then all of a sudden you got to play a 12-game schedule in September. It's going to be interesting to see what it does to the FCS in the fall, even more so than not the rest of the spring.
And it's not like these are deep rosters. They're not nearly as deep as FBS rosters are. So, that's definitely something to kind of look at long-term here and kind of consider as we head on into the fall. But as far as this week goes, what is this? FCS Spring Week 7, I believe?
7 if you count the opening week game.
Okay, so week 7 here. And there was one game that jumped off the page to me at first. And you and I talked about this before we started recording. So I'm glad you set the record straight for me. But I looked at this game on Saturday. First game on the board, game 901, 902. San Diego and Presbyterian. This is an 8 a.m. kickoff for a San Diego team traveling cross-country to Clinton, South Carolina, which is where Presbyterian College is. I'm sure everybody listening to the show today knew that. So, if that's ever a trivia question for you, I'm glad you'll be able to get that one. But San Diego's laying 18 here with this early morning start. And I sat there and I thought to myself, why the hell is San Diego going all the way to, bum F South Carolina to play a game? And you mentioned to me, these two teams are actually in the same conference.
They are. So San Diego's in a conference. It's called the Pioneer League, where everybody's an East Coast team, or at least East or Midwest outside of San Diego. So they're always traveling. They're always used to it. I mean, you're talking about teams like, Dayton, who's not playing this spring, but still, I mean, people know where that's at. Valparaiso's in Indiana, Butler, Morehead State's that, down south on the East Coast there, Drake, Stetson, all these teams are East Coast and Midwest teams, and yet you got San Diego in it. And you're probably asking, well, how does San Diego do? How about this? San Diego's won 39 consecutive games in this conference. That's an all-time record. Forget just the Pioneer. That's the record for any FCS conference. 39 consecutive wins in the conference. I will say, I think if I had to lean, even though my power rating says San Diego is the play here, just stylistically, their offense struggles. It's tough for them to get margin, even though they have an elite defense. And I'm not really high on Presbyterian this year, but I would lean Presbyterian. But before you jump all in and say, hey, man, I got to take Presbyterian here because of, the maybe unique situation, it's not unique. San Diego's used to doing it, and they've been doing it well.
It is crazy. I mean, that's insane to me. And as somebody who's, following this to the degree of doing the show with you every Thursday, it's just nuts to me to think that these two teams are playing each other so early in the morning, and that for San Diego, like, it may not be that much of a detriment. It's just kind of normal for them. Not something that I would have thought about, any other season, but, certainly not something I would have thought about until you and I discussed it here. What about the rest of the card for Saturday? Any games stand out to you? Anything you've played where the number is still kind of in range?
Yeah, the one that's still in range that I really like, probably my top play right now, is Missouri State, plus 10.5 at home against Southern Illinois. For starters, Missouri State was a team I isolated that I thought was going to be much improved. Keep in mind, coming into this spring season, Missouri State in their previous 19 games were 1-18 straight up. They went 0-3 in the fall, but I mean, they lost two very competitive games to Central Arkansas, a top 25 caliber FCS team, and Missouri State probably should have won both of them. They were -8 combined turnovers in those two games, and then they got blown out by Oklahoma. So that was their first three games under a new head coach. You might have heard his name, Bobby Petrino. When you get him off the motorcycle, the guy can actually coach a little bit, especially when you compare him to these other FCS coaches. And they brought in a bunch of transfers. The talent level is way up. And, after going 1-18 their previous 19 games, you got a Missouri State team right now in the toughest conference in the FCS, the Missouri Valley. They're 3-1 so far this spring, and they've upset a couple of ranked teams already. And I kind of thought, hey, this is a team that's 1-18 that at the very least is going to be an average FCS team. And right now, if we're going off pure power ratings, they're a borderline top 25 team. That's a stark difference. And the other part of the handicap here is a fade against a Southern Illinois team that's really banged up. They have been playing well in the spring, but they lost their starting quarterback. And last week they just got dump trucked 44-3. Most people say, hey, that's the outlier. That's by far their worst performance. I'm thinking it could be more of the same here because, they're down a bunch of linemen on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Again, they're down to a backup quarterback. You already admitted it, and I fully agree. These aren't deep rosters. You got 20 less scholarships than an FBS roster. And I think Missouri State, not only plus 10.5 is good, but I would be a bit surprised they win the game outright.
Man, it's so crazy to look up and down this board where you've got North Dakota State, a 3-touchdown favorite against South Dakota in a game with a total basically in the 43.5 range. Drake and Stetson is a 17-point spread, effectively 16.5 with a total of 36. You've got a game on Sunday here, Sacred Heart and Wagner, 13.5 Sacred Heart favored, 37 the total. I mean, if we ever saw anything like this at the FBS level, it'd be an automatic insta bet on the dog, just simply by the correlation of the spread and the total there. But it's just a different kind of animal here in the FCS level.
Well, it's not a liquid market, Adam. So if you're wondering, hey, well, what's going on? Why are the underdogs cashing so much? Well, a lot of it is just how the market is. you just broke it down. I mean, if you're blindly betting the under so far, you're like 55%. So you already have lower scoring, lower totals on average, much lower than the FBS level. So limited compressed scoring as it is. And yet they're still going under the total at a 55% rate. So, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a head cashier at Walmart to figure out that, of course, you got suppressed scoring and you still have a lot of, double-digit favorites on the board. I mean, you shouldn't be shocked that a lot of the dogs are covering at a 60+% rate so far.
Anything else on the FCS card you're taking a look at before we move to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, the other one that I gave out that hasn't moved too much, I bet like 15 picks. And I told my customers, I'm like, look, I can't run a service giving out 15 picks. I mean, most of you can't handle the bankroll. Most of you only want a couple picks a week. And then, it doesn't take much. I mean, tough giving out picks when, within 15, 20 minutes, the spread can move 3 points, maybe even a point and a half off your own personal bet. Just one bet can move the market that much. So it is difficult to run a service and give out a lot of picks because the lines move so quickly. One that I think the line's going to drop is Youngstown State, North Dakota. And I know you're going to say, wow, I mean, Youngstown State's, pretty pathetic. They're 1-4 so far. North Dakota's been red hot, but they did just lose their last game last week against North Dakota State. This is another one where you got a double-digit underdog with a low total of 42.5. A Youngstown State defense, as much as they've struggled on offense, their defense has been there all year. They're only allowing 21 points per game. Tough to cover a double-digit point spread when you got a defense in Youngstown State that doesn't give up much. And I think Youngstown State, with a first-year coach, finally starting to figure it out. I'll give credit to my former employer. They do a nice job. They give out like a game grade. They have they have the entire box score on their FCS team pages, and they give a game grade, according to what the final was, the yards per play, the yards per game, what's the game grade on that one for an individual team. And the last 3 weeks, Youngstown State has been improving every single game from a game grade aspect. Makes sense with a first-year coach. This Youngstown State team that I want to play on the rest of the season. I think North Dakota, after, their unbeaten streak, they kind of were humbled last week against North Dakota State. I'm not sure that they're, really amped up here to go out and blow out a Youngstown State team, even if they're capable of it. I'm not sure that they're highly motivated here. So Youngstown State Penguins here plus 12 looks good to me.
All right, let's move over to the Sweet 16 side of things here. And, I hope our listeners are taking something out of the FCS stuff. I know it's probably not everybody's favorite market, but yeah, you are animated. You're excited. You've been beating the closing number significantly here on the season so far. So, hopefully the listeners like something. It's a little bit of a change of pace. I certainly do. It's nice to not sit here and talk nothing but college basketball at this time of the year. And the NBA is just, it's not a market that really interests me a ton. And with this being my show and kind of deciding what it is that I want to do, we don't talk a whole lot of NBA on the program, but we do talk a lot of college basketball, and we will talk about these Sweet 16 games here. And let's go ahead and just sort of talk first and foremost, before we get into these games specifically, just your impressions of the tournament so far, of what we've seen, of, whether you want to take that in the direction of conferences that have done well and those that haven't. Just, overall, what you saw in the first and second rounds.
Well, first thing I'll say is, non-conference action is important. So, I mean, not many of us saw that the Pac-12, was capable of doing what they've done so far. I think they're up to 9-1 against the spread. And those 9 covers you're not talking a lot of fortunate covers in that mix. I mean, we're talking significant covers in almost all 9 of those covers that they've had, the Pac-12. You had a very limited non-conference season, so it was tough to judge individual conferences when you're basically the first time you're playing significant non-conference games or this tournament. Where I'm on the coin flip on the opposite side of the coin is the Big Ten, who, myself included in the market, thought was the best conference in college hoops. And obviously have really been a big disappointment so far the tournament. So that would be a big thing where maybe it's made it difficult where I haven't had a great tournament so far. That was maybe a big missing piece of data that we had that we didn't for this particular season. And then overall, I mean, I'll say this. I've been filling out brackets for 25 years. I think it's the first time I've been out this early. I mean, I'm out. I had Illinois win it all. That's never happened to me. I lose my national champ in the second round. And I know we'll get to the game here in a little bit, but I thought if Loyola Chicago could replicate that performance, that then they're going to the Final Four and maybe even the championship game, and we'll see if they're playing against Aga. But there was nothing fluky about that one. Yeah, I'll say I can't believe my bracket's done. There's always upsets, Adam, but I usually still have my national champ going in well into the Sweet 16.
Well, and that was something you and I talked about before we started recording here, is that 5 of these 8 games this week in the Sweet 16 have lines of 6.5 or higher. And look, the Cinderella stories are great. Chaos is awesome. Whatever. It's fun for the first 4 days of the tournament. But then this is what you get. And of course, one of the games is Villanova and Baylor. That's got a number now up to 7.5. So that just kind of is what it is. It would be probably 6-ish, maybe 6.5 if Gillespie was there. But, okay, fine. That's a number 1 against a 5. Sure, you're going to get those. But, we've got several double-digit seeds here in the Sweet 16. We're missing a number 1 seed in Illinois. We've got what people perceive to be a weak number 1 seed in Michigan. That's only a 2.5-point favorite, and that number is threatening to go down even further. So, the chaos is cool, but at the same time, we're not getting the best of the Sweet 16 games here that we could have gotten. One thing that I want to mention real quickly is, and I don't have the exact number in front of me, maybe you know it off the top of your head, or maybe you've seen it somewhere, but first half unders were printing money over the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament, specifically in that first round. I think the first day they were, undefeated on the first half under. I'd be curious to see if the books adjust to that next year, if that was just an outlier. But that was something that definitely caught me over the first 4 days of the tournament.
Well, they certainly started adjusting it this year. I'll say this. I'm glad you brought that up. It was, and it makes sense. I don't care if it's a COVID season or not. It just makes sense in general that teams are a little, maybe I'll have to maybe do some homework and see how. I'm guessing it's 55% long term. But it's something that if you're handicapping it regularly, that you probably just, back of the mind, you forget about it. I wrote it down to look to take advantage of it next year's tournament. I'm not saying that it's, a great bet the rest of this year because, once teams have already played and they kind of got those butterflies out of the way, I don't think it's as big of a deal the rest of the tournament, but certainly the 2 days of the opening first round, I think under first half makes a lot of sense. I typically like betting unders, period. But yeah, obviously the thing that really, hurts you sometimes is late fouling because it's win or go home, and the team's got to, if you got a 5, 6, 7 point margin and the team wants to stay in it in the final 90 seconds, you get a lot of, becomes a free throw fest, and your total sometimes can go out the window, even if you're covering by a significant margin. But it was significant enough and something that I don't think was much of an outlier, Adam, that I wrote it in my note, pasted it on my computer, that next March, first round, I got to look at first half unders.
Well, and I think there are a lot of reasons why. You mentioned the butterflies. There's kind of a feeling out process because you're playing a team that you don't play. And also, too, you're coming out of playing nothing but conference play, basically. So you're familiar with the styles of all of those teams. You probably get a little bit comfortable with the styles of all those teams. And that's something I've talked about on both Tuesday and Wednesday's shows here this week with regards to the Big Ten. The Big Ten's lost the turnover battle in a lot of games here. And it's a big reason why there's one Big Ten team left out of the 9 that actually made this tournament. And it's a conference where nobody turns the ball over and nobody forces turnovers. So now all of a sudden you get into a situation in March where you're uncomfortable. You're playing a team that either forces them or maybe plays a defense you haven't seen or something like that. And the Big Ten teams just weren't adaptable enough. They didn't adjust. And that's something that, maybe we need to carry over into future months of March here is, just a different style of play, a style of play you haven't seen for a long period of time. If you come from a conference where a lot of teams play a very different brand of basketball, I think that's actually beneficial to you as opposed to the Big Ten where, you have different efficiency metrics and maybe some teams play at a slightly different tempo. But by and large, those teams are boilerplate. It's just a matter of what kind of talent you put into that lineup.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And a conference that I think is kind of up and coming because they've hired a bunch of good coaches. But there's drastic styles of play. SEC's conference you want to look at. I mean, it's basically been Kentucky and everybody else for the last 20, 25 years. But because of some good coaching hires and contrasting styles of play, I mean, I think that conference moving forward probably be better adept at handling different types of offenses and defenses that they see. The SEC, that's a conference that I think is going to be undervalued.
Well, and maybe to a degree, that's why the Pac-12 has had success. You bring in a guy like Mick Cronin, who plays a
Yeah.
very different style of play, not only than what UCLA used to play, but really what a lot of teams in that conference play. Andy Enfeld, different guy at USC, comes over, has pretty immediate success. We saw obviously how flexible Dana Altman can be, with what he
He's
did
tremendous.
to Iowa.
Most underrated coach in the country.
Just brilliant. He's just a brilliant coach. And then you've got, I think Colorado is a team that had
Yep.
a good bit of upside. You've got all these different kinds of teams in the Pac-12, and in the Big Ten, I just kind of look at them and everybody feels the same, just with different levels of talent. And I think maybe that is something that did hold the conference back here for this year's March Madness. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into these Sweet 16 games here, and we'll try to hit all 8 of them in fairly rapid fire fashion. Beginning with the first game here on Saturday, Oregon State, Loyola Chicago. We're seeing 7s pop on the board now for this one, with money coming in on the Ramblers, total 125.5. And we talk about looking for context clues in the betting market, Brad, and anytime I see a favorite going up with a low total or a total that has kind of gone down, that says a lot to me.
Yeah, but with that said, I mean, believe it or not, I know everyone talks in football, key number 3 and 7, key number in basketball, a lot of times 5, 7, obviously 2 and 3. But if it goes above 7 for me with 2 very slow tempo teams, we're talking 2 teams in the 300s as far as tempo. I am not built to lay the points with the favorite with that kind of tempo going on. With that being said, if Loyola Chicago can replicate anything near what they did against Illinois, I mean, they're a top 2-3 team in the entire country. So, I mean, I'll have a dead Oregon State ticket here if that's the type of efficiency we get from Loyola Chicago, what we just saw on Sunday.
I will say this, I like Loyola here. I think 7 is getting a little bit expensive. This one was 6 for a little bit, I believe, right after it opened. But then pretty much
could have gotten 6.5 yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, there are still 6.5s out there to be sure. And I did take a piece of Loyola at 6.5. And for me, I just think it's one of those things where not only do I trust Porter Moser more, but Oregon State goes on this awesome run, this very unexpected run at that. And now for 5 days, they have to sit around and wait for this game. And for me, and I wrote about this, I actually did a preview for this game over at bangthebook.com here this morning. For Loyola Chicago, if they had to come back 2 days after beating Illinois, I would have faded them because they beat Big Brother. They beat a number 1. They beat a really good team that a lot of people thought had, Final Four aspirations, if not the chance to win it all. As you said, you picked Illinois in your bracket. If Loyola had to come back right away and play that game, I don't think I would like them. But because they have time and Oregon State instead has time to cool off a little bit, I think just situationally, I kind of like Loyola here with, extra time for Moser to decipher what the Beavers are going to do. And just simply the fact that Oregon State is not as good as they've played the last 2-3 weeks.
I agree with that. They're not, but I mean, like we talked off at the top, I mean, I'm having troubles fading the Pac-12 right now. It could be the conference just, maybe Oregon State's entire body of work now. Maybe you give them, you don't knock them as much for losing a bunch of games in the conference with the conference being so good. And maybe, I mean, the UCLA game in the opening round was kind of fluky that they came from behind 16 and won the game in overtime, but it's not like they beat up Oregon from start to finish, an Oregon team that I love and have for a while. And then there was nothing fluky about their 2 tournament wins, Adam. I mean, they controlled matters against Tennessee and Oklahoma State, and especially Oklahoma State was a red hot team with one of the best players in the country. I guess that's where my pushback is. I could see if it was fluky, but I mean, right now Oregon State's playing. I mean, their last 5 games against a really good conference and even against 2 solid teams in the NCAA tournament, I don't know what more you could ask of them.
Are you taking Oregon State plus 7?
Oof. Yeah, see, I'm big talk, all that. Yeah, I lean that way. I want 7.5 for a bet.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
no bet.
I know I can
But
eat off. I know I
numbers
can.
matter. You laid 6.5. I want 7.5 at 7. You're still comfortable with Loyola Chicago. I'm leaning Oregon State. I mean, folks, numbers matter, especially with tight lines in the tournament.
Well, I was just gonna say. I mean, I can eat for free for a month off of you in Vegas with all the side bets we've made.
I already
I was wondering if
owe
you
you a
wanted to do
couple
like that,
dinners. No,
but
I don't feel like
okay, that's fine.
paying. It's 2025, and I'm still trying to catch up. Let's try to get this my debt paid off here this year.
All right, that's fine. We'll work on that instead. All right, the next game here for the Sweet 16, a good one. Baylor and Villanova, but Baylor up to 7.5 here, and this total has pretty consistently gone up day by day, now sitting as high as 142 out there in the marketplace. Now, I don't think the over money really surprises anybody
No.
because Baylor has not played well defensively since their COVID pause. But with that in mind, does Baylor going up to 7.5 surprise you here?
Crossing through 7 a little bit, but I mean, really depends. I mean, did the light switch finally come on for Baylor after the COVID pause? This is a team that hasn't been as good as what they were, when they were 17-0 and started out the season. Then clearly, at the very least, the second best team in the country. And a lot of people at that time were thinking that they were better Gonzaga just because the competition in the Big 12 had been better. But man, they looked really good against Wisconsin. That was by far, in my opinion, their best performance since the COVID pause that they had for 3 weeks there in February. And I'm going to lean Villanova here, but that Wisconsin performance, to me gives me a little bit of pause.
This is a tough one because I did like Baylor a little bit. I just, to me, there are two problems here. The first is Scott Drew versus Jay Wright.
You think?
That's a big problem for me. I mean, when you look at this Baylor team, they've had some very good teams that have wound up with disappointing outcomes in the NCAA tournament. Now, this is the first time they've been a number 1 seed under Scott Drew. So there is that. But this is a team that's had disappointments not only in the NCAA tournament, but in the Big 12 tournament too. So as the stakes get higher, whether it's Drew or his players, whatever the case may be, this team shrinks a little bit. So I liked him at 6.5. And then I start thinking about it and I'm like, man, I can't advise laying anything higher than that because I just don't know if this team plays to its ceiling in a game of this magnitude. So then I even start thinking about it. Is Villanova first half worth a play here +4? Because I've got to think that Jay Wright will have a good game plan here. And this is the kind of game where the loss of Colin Gillespie can show up. And I think it could show up in the second half of this one if Baylor, adjusts and plays well and all of that. But the more I thought about it, where, I kind of had this Baylor 6.5 lean, did like the over, but that's kind of pricing me out a little bit now too. I don't know if I have anything on this game that I really want to play now.
Yeah, because I'm gonna give you a pro Baylor thing, and it's mainly the schedule for Villanova. I mean, have they played really an elite team? Creighton's probably their best team that they played all season. I guess Texas, if we're talking about comparing, the team that the Baylor's played, but since Gillespie's went out these last 4 games, I know they won their last 2, but they haven't played anybody in the top 50 of my power ranks. Providence, Georgetown, even though Georgetown was playing well to close. But I mean, in the NCAA tournament, Winthrop and North Texas doesn't necessarily move the needle too much. I just got done saying, hey, Oregon State's actually beaten some really good teams and gotten some margin on them. Villanova beating Winthrop and North Texas doesn't move the needle much for me. So that is a major concern that like you mentioned, the Gillespie injury might, as much as it showed up in those first 2 games without him, it might really show, especially in the second half here. So you're talking me into it. If I'm going to play Villanova, first half makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's the only thing I could think of where, I just expect Jay Wright to be very well prepared. He's great. I mean, he's a brilliant head coach. And, Villanova's made runs, and they've had the talent certainly to do so, but they've made runs. Baylor's had talent too, and they've struggled to make runs.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think it's a great game. I think it's a very fascinating game to talk about. I just don't know if there's a lot of betting opportunity in that game where the side and total currently stand. And kudos to anybody that got over 139, because I think that's probably the best play of that game there. Oral Roberts in Arkansas. Game 623, 624 is the 725 tip-off. Arkansas laying 11, 159 the total. These two teams played earlier in the year. Arkansas won by 11. Game fell on 163. So the total a little bit lower here than what that first game produced. But anything that you could play in this one?
I don't expect to be involved on this one. Number one, I'm not, and I think Chris Felica had a good stat on it. I mean, double-digit favorites in the Sweet 16 round aren't great. Big negative. So to me, that's preventing me from taking Arkansas here. But I really 15 seed that's getting celebrated. You talk about Oregon State. I think it's more with Oral Roberts. I mean, they're talk of the country for 5 days. And the way Arkansas plays, I could see him running them out. No, really no play for me. I know we'll see. I know a lot of people don't want to play an over on a big total here, but we'll see if the market continues to go down, I might take a little bit of a piece on the over here if the number continues to drop.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into this handicap where, I talked about Oregon State and how I think that the downtime is a detriment for them. You could make the same case for Oral Roberts. I mean, they had to go through a win the Summit League tournament. Was the only way that they were getting in. Then they win those two games in pretty close emotional fashion over Ohio State and Florida, where, I mean, is the layoff good for them because they're so driven by A. Smith and O'Banner that those two guys get a few days off and, can kind of reset, hydrate, whatever it is that they need to do? That benefits them. But at the same time, in watching Arkansas, there are so many ways this team can score and so many guys that can do it that's what worries me. If either A. Smith or O'Banner is off for Oral Roberts, they can lose this game in very big fashion. If both of those guys are on, they can keep it close. And to me, at this time of the year with baseball coming up and all the other things that are going on, I don't have to gamble. I don't have to make that gamble. So
good point.
I don't think this is a game that I'm playing either.
I couldn't have said it better. Just because it's there, just because it's isolated, and you only got 15 big-time college basketball games to bet on the rest of the season, doesn't necessarily mean that you got to always have money on it.
I will say this, though. I do like the next game. Syracuse and Houston. Houston laying 6, $140 on the total here. We'll get your thoughts first before I regurgitate the thoughts I've had the previous 2 days on this game already.
I'm leaning under. Probably, one of my favorite totals of the Sweet 16 round. I know you're probably expecting me to take a side, but no, I kind of like the over. I mean, the unique style of defense that Syracuse runs and then an extremely slow tempo for Houston. I think 140, in my opinion, is a little too high. So I really like under 140. I'm interested. I mean, if I had to take a side, I'd probably lean Syracuse. But, you give Calvin Sampson, a week to prepare for it. I think, it's not going to be a huge disadvantage like it would for others. But I would lean Syracuse, but I prefer the under.
No, that's fair. I think the under makes a lot of sense here because one of the reasons why I want to fade Syracuse in this game.
Oh, here we go.
They're shooting 50% from three in this tournament against San Diego State and West Virginia. And look, they're a decent three-point shooting team, 35.1%, ranks 105th in the country according to Bart Torvik. But I mean, this is a team at 61 for 141 in their last 5 games. I mean, this is not going to continue. And I hope that it ends here. They've given up 11 threes to each of their last 3 opponents too. So, they've just been able to outscore the opposition a little bit from that 3-point line. But Houston, I mean, Houston's long, they're good, they're tops in the country in effective field goal percentage defense, and that offensive rebounding edge is just way too much for me to overlook here in this game. Houston, number 2 in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. Syracuse, number 339 in offensive rebounding percentage against. Even if Houston doesn't shoot it well, they're getting high percentage second chance looks at the rim. And I think they're the kind of team that cashes in on them. I like Houston here -6. I know it's very dangerous to go against Boeheim and Syracuse and what this team does. Every year they are on the bubble, and then they get in the tournament and they make life hell for somebody, and people don't want to fade them. You know what? I'm going to do it. And if I lose, so be it. They ain't shooting 50% in this tournament the rest of the way from 3, and I don't think they're holding Houston's offensive rebounding down. So I like the Cougars here -6.
There you go. That prevents me from betting Syracuse at all, even if it was pizza money. I will say one thing, another thing that I kind of like the under. I feel like I'm kind of owed one. You want to talk about a misleading final? I mean, this is one of the baddest. I mean, it wasn't like a last second, full court shot beat you, but with 10 minutes left in the San Diego State Syracuse game, and we're talking a blowout here, so it's not like a bunch of free throw shooting in the last 2 minutes, causes it to go over, something you see every Saturday in a few games. But with 10 minutes left, the San Diego State Syracuse game was on pace to cover by more than 30 points. Cover. And somehow it lost. I am live on the air doing a show, and it's one of those rare times. I mean, I've done it. I hate to say that you shouldn't do this. It's a rookie move, but I counted it as a win. I mean, I was stunned when I came across the final as we're doing the show, and I found out I lost that freaking bet on the under in the Syracuse San Diego State game. I mean, the two teams made their last 6 threes in the final 2 minutes, 3 threes in the final 30 seconds. They're just throwing up threes, making them. So to me, that screams a little bit of value on the under here. I'm owed one by the gambling gods.
There you go. All right, so let's go to Sunday here. Let's break down these 4 Sweet 16 games, beginning with the early one, Creighton and Gonzaga. Gonzaga down to 13 in a lot of places out there in the market. So somebody is brave. Somebody's willing to step in front of this Gonzaga team and take Creighton. Big old total in this game of 158. Are you one of those brave people backing Creighton here?
Yeah, I lean Creighton and the under. Pizza bets. And I'm not talking fancy where you take the whole family of 4 out to one of them specialty places in Vegas. I'm talking probably more of, ordering Marco's or Domino's or whatever you prefer, the cardboard pizza. But yeah, Creighton and the under for me. You talk about old one, Gonzaga had a run out against Oklahoma 8-1 to get the cover there. But I think Creighton, now they finally kind of answered that question. You thought there was team turmoil with the McDermott comments. Now that they're in the Sweet 16, I'm not sure that that's a big issue at this point. And again, I'm not built to lay that kind of number in a Sweet 16 round. So I'm always going to look more towards the dog. I will say this, though. I am waiting because I saw a lot of pro Gonzaga money come in right before tip against Oklahoma, where it was one of the very few times where I took a bad number in that second round game. I had Oklahoma and I was like a point away from taking the best of the number. And we've seen a lot of anti-Creighton money show up so far. So I am not anxious to run to the window to bet Creighton plus 13 and a half at this point. I'm going to wait and hopefully get a better number.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it's fair to definitely wait here, especially the early game on Sunday. Everyone's going to kind of be interested in playing it and all of that. Look, I mean, here's the thing, right? Gonzaga could win this game by 40. Gonzaga could win this game by 8. It all depends on how Creighton shoots, because Creighton, they'll be okay with playing Gonzaga's tempo. I don't think they'll have a big problem with it. They played a lot of slower tempo games in the Big East, but there are some teams that, don't really like to get up and down the floor in that conference.
Yeah.
I think they're okay with it. If I'm Greg McDermott, I know my only chance in this game is to shoot like 60% from 3, because I'm not stopping Gonzaga. I'm just, nobody else has done it. I'm not going to be able to do it. So in that respect, it's kind of a high variance game. And in a high variance game like this, with a Creighton team that can shoot, likes to shoot jump shots, is familiar with the Hinkle Fieldhouse venue, I could talk myself into taking Creighton plus the points. I wouldn't love it, but I mean, this is Creighton's kind of game, where I think that they have a chance to cover it because it's going to go up and down the floor, probably be played to 75, 76 possessions, if not more. If they shoot well, they're in it. If they don't, they're not. And I like to think they could shoot well.
They're 14th in effective field goal percentage. That's not bad. Borderline top 50 and 3-point percentage, 2-point percentage. They're in the top 10. They're very capable. But Oklahoma was red hot early to start that game. And I still, you just can't stop Gonzaga. That's a freight train.
Oh yeah. No, you can't stop Gonzaga. And I will say this. I mean, depending on your view of Creighton, I mean, based on, like Bart Torvik's team rankings, I mean, Creighton's the 3rd best team Gonzaga's played this year. I don't know if people, will believe that or not, but I mean, Creighton's not a bad team. I mean, they're a hard team to bet on because they shoot so many jump shots and they're god awful at the free throw line. But I mean, maybe Creighton's just kind of better than we think. I don't know.
I think there's still that, stink on them for what went down with McDermott's comments. I think had they not gotten, crushed in the Big East championship game by 25 points, uh, and McDermott's comments not made national news, I think public perception would be higher on this Creighton team. And because of that, maybe look, I faded against Creighton the first two rounds, won one, lost one. But again, at this point, I'm not going to be bringing up the McDermott comments other than maybe we can take advantage of people overreacting to it.
All right, so we move to the next game here, and quite possibly the best game of the Sweet 16, Florida State and Michigan. Seeing some Michigan -2 starting to show up out there a little bit. Still some 2.5s in the market. Total has come down to 143.5 for this one. And look, I mean, before the tournament even started, this is a spot I had circled, and I said, you know what? I think Florida State beats Michigan. And I thought the line would be 3.5. It's, down to 2.5 now. There's a lot of love and a lot of support for Florida State here. And while I'm not going to back off of my prediction, it does concern me to a degree.
Oh, yeah, it does me as well. But I'll say this. Florida State's that one non-cover for the Pac-12. So the Pac-12 has basically covered every game. They're 9-1, and they've covered like every game by significant margin, with the one exception being Florida State crushing Colorado. I think you got to circle that. I mean, I'm with you. I took Florida State to go to the Final Four in this region, so I'm not going to back off of that initial gut instinct. I expected the line to come a little bit higher, and it probably came out what I expected, 3.5. Now you're taking 2.5. You're taking the worst of the line. I know most people are not going to bet until game day. I think the line's probably going to close 2 is my expectation, maybe even 1.5. If we really start, if the public also, right now, I clearly sharp money early in the weeks on the Noles. Can't disagree. They're one of the tallest teams in the country. They got a deep bench. I still think Michigan's vulnerable without Isaiah Livers. I mean, one thing, if you look to exploit KenPom, which is basically the basketball market, I mean, he has Michigan by 4, but keep in mind that's with, that's, not taking Isaiah Livers out of the equation. That's just an efficiency, projected score with Livers playing most of the season. I think he's worth more than a point and a half. And because of that, I think there's value on Florida State.
And exactly what I talked about earlier about the Big Ten, teams had great turnover percentages, but that was largely because nobody in the conference forced turnovers. Michigan does not force turnovers. 338th in the country in turnover percentage. They had 3 takeaways against LSU. 3. They were lucky to win that game because of bench contributions and, what some of the guys did for them that don't often play a lot. The role players kind of stepped up for them in that game to help them beat LSU. There is one problem on offense with this Florida State team. It's their turnover rate. They're over 20%. That's not good, but Michigan's not the team to take full advantage of that. And we've seen Big Ten teams fail to take advantage of that already in this tournament. So if I look at that and I say, look, the one glaring weakness for Florida State, maybe 2, they don't take care of the basketball. And for some reason, despite their height, they don't rebound well on the defensive end. I don't know why, but they don't do it. Well, you know what? Michigan's not a great offensive rebounding team, and they don't take the ball away. This is a very difficult matchup for Michigan. I've got to stick with what I said. I've got to stick with Florida State here. And, the number's not as good now, but, look, if you're going to play this one, I feel like you just go ahead and take the money line at the best price you can find.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't know when you're. I'm not going to go down. Honestly, I thought about going down the road. You and I have been talking for almost 2 hours now. I'm not going to. I'll bring it up. Hopefully, Florida State wins, and hopefully they're advancing the Final Four the next time you and I talk.
That sounds good to me. All right, so let's take a look here at this UCLA and Alabama game. Alabama 6.5-point favorite, total 145.5. And I thought yesterday's guest Kiev O'Neill asked a really poignant question on this game. And he said, look, with what UCLA has done here, winning 3 games in 6 days, with what the Pac-12 has done, this number is 6.5. What is this number against Alabama before the tournament begins? Because it sure as hell ain't 6.5.
Oh wow, I'm guessing it's I don't know, maybe 8 or so. 8. What was the expectation was going to be higher than that?
Yeah, I mean,
I
I'm
actually
thinking
think it
eight and a
start.
half, 9.
Yeah, 8.5, 9. I mean, I think the number to bet was obviously 4.5 and 5. I think it's starting now. If it goes to 7, I'm going to take UCLA, even though I think maybe the most underrated unit in the entire country is probably Alabama's defense, number 3 in efficiency. And yet it's the Alabama 3-point shooting that usually gets all the credit. I mean, look, you got a dead ticket. If Alabama's on from behind the arc because they rely so much heavily on the 3-point shot, I mean, you're dead. But if they just happen to have an off performance, I think you got, if I can get a 7, that's what I want to take here. I actually think that there's going to be some value on UCLA after we've seen this line go up a point and a half so far.
I look at this UCLA team and my question is, and I'm not saying that they're short on experience or anything like that, but my question on them is how uncomfortable are they in this game? You know, because they want to play that very, very slow tempo, the thing that Mick Cronin has done throughout the course of his career. Alabama wants to run. I mean, this is a quintessential pace war here in the Sweet 16. And UCLA, if they're forced into running, if they're forced into playing a little bit faster than they want to, how does that go for them? Because they're a good 3-point shooting team. Alabama's a top 10 team defensively against the 3. So, you know, does UCLA, if this game winds up being played, let's say to 68, 69 possessions, something like that, something much faster than a regular UCLA game, can they keep pace? Are they comfortable enough in their own skin to, you know, find ways to be patient on offense, try to slow the game down? I don't know if they can do that, but I know I've got Nate Oates who's going to look at this game and look at the film for UCLA and try to do anything he can to make this game fast. Can Cronin get his team to keep it slow? I don't know, but it's again, a very fascinating game. I have to look the Alabama side. Not only are they the better team, but I also think the perception of the Pac-12 is so inflated that this number is a little bit cheap. But, you know, again, still a very interesting game that, you know, if you don't have a strong conviction, you don't have to bet it just because it exists.
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to talk ourselves into a bet here. Maybe since you're taking mainly favorites and me taking mainly dogs, you know, with Florida State being one of the exceptions, I'll propose if you know, we got no bet if, you know, the dogs split out here 4-4 or favorites from your side of things. Favorites go 5-3 or better, you win a dinner bet. Dogs go 5-3 or better, I win mine. Sound fair?
That sounds fair to me.
All right.
I'm good with that. I think I'm good with that. This one could be the swing game, and maybe that's why you did this here with Oregon and USC, the late game coming up on Sunday. And USC 2-point favorite for this one, total 139. All right, lay it on me, man. What do you think about this one?
Man, it's a really tough one. You know, I harken back to the matchup that these two teams played back in February the 22nd. It was really down the stretch. It was the only game that Oregon just looked, you know, they looked lost. They looked scared in that game. Is it a matchup issue against USC, or was it just, you know, happened to be their one-off performance, you know, after they started getting healthy there in the early part of February? I'm going to chalk it up to, you know, I think I got the better coach here. And again, I'll chalk it up where, you know, what's this spread if Oregon's healthy all season? I'm guessing the lines pick them, if not Oregon favorite, just considering how well the Ducks have played here since February the 6th. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to lean Oregon +2. I'm also tempted. We'll see. My expectation after we saw both offenses really light it up in the second round, how high does this total go? I don't think you can expect offensive efficiency from Oregon and USC like you saw in the second round games against Kansas and Iowa. I think I'm going to end up talking myself. My preference to bet this game is going to be the under, especially if I can find something close to 140. I mean, the two teams played to 130 in their first matchup. So lean Oregon, probably prefer the under though.
The thing that worries me about the total is, did Dana Altman just run with Iowa because he saw those defensive weaknesses, or has Dana Altman sort of, you know, decided to kind of change things up a little bit because he's got a lot of scoring options now that this is a healthy team, a lot of scoring options. And USC, they don't really want to play a track meet. They kind of want to keep the game around an average tempo, something like that. how does Oregon play this? Because the first game played to 62 possessions, and it didn't really work out for Oregon at all. They only had 0.932 points per possession in that game. So did Altman do that as a one-off? Is he maybe trying to confuse teams a little bit, throw something at them that they're not expecting? I don't know. That's the only thing that gives me pause on the under. And look, we know what Altman's been throughout his career. I don't think he's going to try to run with USC here on trying to speed them up. So I do think that the under makes some sense. Familiarity kind of plays a role here too. But that's the one thing, man, is I don't know what Dana Altman's capable of.
Yeah.
And he's very good in the tournament, but so is Andy Enfield. So I think it's a good nightcap, man. I wish these two teams weren't playing each other because I'd kind of want to play on
both. Yep.
But, one of them's got to win and one of them's got to lose here. And I will say this, the thing that was interesting to me is that USC was lined a favorite and that the line did go up when everyone has this high perception of healthy Oregon. So again, context clues, maybe that kind of told us all that we need to know.
It's available on their site for free, but I can tell you why it moved up. I mean, Right Angle gave out USC and then they, of any public handicapping service out there that has influence on the market, it's Right Angle Sports. So they gave out USC. That probably gives me a little bit of pause on Oregon. That's how much I respect Right Angle. I honestly, now that I've looked at it, you're right. Dana Altman can flip on a switch. So it's really tough handicapping what he's actually going to do. I mean, head coaches, it's their job, can't necessarily figure them out, let alone a guy like myself. The pause that I have now that I was thinking, betting the under is, you're right. They've kind of flipped the script now that they've been healthy and they have a lot more options offensively. I'm looking at more full season averages that's getting me to lean towards under, but their last 8 games for Oregon all went over. So you're right. Now that they've gotten healthy, they've been much better and efficient offensively. So I guess I've kind of talked myself into not betting the game. That's what Adam does to you people.
I mean, it's tricky. You look at their first game in the Pac-12 tournament, they were perfectly content with playing at Arizona's pace, played to 74 possessions, scored 91 points. They slowed it down against Oregon State, and they got beat by 11. So I don't know. Maybe Altman kind of looks at this and says, look, maybe our team is optimized more playing a little bit quicker of a tempo. I don't know. I mean, the guy's brilliant. So if he wants to change something up here for this game, maybe a live betting opportunity, something like that. But should be a lot of fun here. And it's always a lot of fun chatting with professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. What's going on over at the website right now, dude?
Yeah, we talked about it at the very start of our long conversation, which I always enjoy, Adam. But Spring Guide, it's free. If you want to jumpstart on college football, you can check that out for free. If you want to sign up for FCS and the rest of the tournament, you can also check that out. It's all available right now at bradpowersports.com.
Yeah, make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7 as well. And as I was telling you before the show here, man, at one of these times, we're going to just go ahead and record our unfiltered chat before we actually start recording the show. But good talking with you as always, man. Thank you so much for that. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
There you go. There's Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter. bradpowersports.com is the website. To finish out the week here on ATS Radio, I will be talking about the National League West on tomorrow's edition of the Bettor's Box. Again, a week away from the start of the Major League Baseball season. Check out that 2021 MLB betting guide, whether you do it over at ATS.io or you download the PDF that you can find on my Twitter page at Skating Tripods. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.